Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Christian Healthcare Ethics. I'm Dr. Curran, and I will be your instructor for this online summer class. And as you're watching this video, I hope you've already purchased the textbook, and you will begin taking a look at the first sections that are indicated in the syllabus. This week, we'll have a quiz due at the end of the day on Wednesday, which is a day later than will be typical for the week-long modules in this course. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the course, what I think I'm trying to do here, and the value of all this. So sometime last week, my wife and I started streaming The Pit, which is a show on HBO Max that is about an emergency room, an emergency department in a hospital in Pittsburgh, a fictional hospital in Pittsburgh. And it's starring Noah Wyle, who was the star of ER, which was a show on about emergency rooms when I was in college. So we started watching The Pit because everybody that we know have been raving about it. And I was really struck within the first couple of episodes. We've only seen 2 or 3 episodes so far, with how many of the issues that we're going to talk about in this class are uncovered in that show. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. But in the very first few episodes, we saw examples of people dealing with issues about whether or not to treat a relative who is terminally ill, whether to put a relative who is older and seriously ill on a ventilator, what to do about someone whose brain has ceased functioning but is being kept alive by a ventilator and other medical interventions, how to determine who should receive care first, questions about whether people who can't afford to pay or people who suffer from emotional, psychological deficits are entitled to care and what kind of care they're entitled to. Within the first few episodes of The Pit, you see a whole universe of the healthcare ethics questions that we're going to address in this class. So my approach to this class is really that it would be a class for people who are not necessarily going into a healthcare profession. I myself am not a member of the allied healthcare professions. Some of you are majoring in something that may lead you into healthcare. You may end up in healthcare, you may not. My premise going into this course is that everybody is going to need healthcare at some point or is going to love somebody who needs healthcare. We are all going to have to make decisions about how to treat, what to treat, whether or not to treat at the end of life, what constitutes a dignified death, all sorts of questions like that we'll take on in this course. We're all going to have to deal with those questions at some point. I've already had to deal with some of them. I'm a little bit older than most of you, I suspect. But if you haven't dealt with them already, you'll be dealing with them eventually. And that's why I think this course is valuable. The course takes a Catholic Christian perspective as a starting point. You don't need to be Catholic or Christian to do well in this course or to understand what we're doing. You don't need to agree with everything that we're going to talk about or read about that is taught by the Church in order to do well in this course. What you will need to do is to understand those positions and be able to develop your own position in response or in dialogue with those. And that's really the point of the course. The Catholic Church has some pretty definitive teachings on things like abortion, in vitro fertilization, end-of-life care, whether or not everybody should have access to health care. And I don't expect you to necessarily agree with all those teachings, but I do expect you to understand them and to be able to develop your own positions, as I said, in response or in dialogue with those positions. So one of the reasons why we are going to take the Catholic Christian position as a starting point is because the Catholic Church has, for, I would say, all of its existence, which is now we're talking about 2,000 years, tried to do ethics for everybody. In other words, the Catholic Church and many other Christian churches as well don't understand them to be just trying to describe what Catholics and Christians should do. They understand themselves to be trying to describe what all human beings should do. And sometimes you'll see Catholic teaching directed in these areas at not just Christians, but all people of goodwill. So for that reason, the Church is working towards a kind of ethics that takes an approach that we're going to refer to in this class and talk about the tradition of natural law, which says that people should act in a certain way, not just because they're Christian, but because it is, from a universal human natural standpoint, the best way to act for human beings and for society. That's really what the Church takes as its starting point, and that's why I think it's so useful to use Christian and Catholic ethics as a starting point for this class. This first module, you'll see when you get into the PowerPoint, which I've posted, which is narrated by me, so make sure you have the sound up for that. If you want to play it at 2 times speed and make me sound like Alvin the Chipmunk, that's fine too. But take a look at that PowerPoint after you've taken the quiz. The PowerPoint won't become available until after the quiz has been taken. I want you to do the reading first. So when you take a look at that, you'll see that we're moving into talking about sort of the grounding of ethics. We'll talk about this basic principles and the methodology that we use for thinking about ethics. So this first week of the course, a lot of it's going to be about how do you determine what constitutes right or wrong? How do you make moral decisions? How do you decide what the right thing to do for you is? And some of our discussion boards will be around those topics. All right. Well, I've introduced myself briefly in the introductions discussion board, and you'll see if you go to the Module 1 folder. Well, if you're watching this video, you've already seen the Module 1 folder. You'll see that we are that we're getting into that introductory material this week and where all those things are. So take a look at those, follow the links, do the work, and give me a shout if you have any questions. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.